We want to welcome you guys tonight. We have with us a guest speaker for tonight's virtual program, Dedria Humphries Barker, and she's going to talk to us about her newly published book, Mother of Orphans, the true and curious story of Irish Alice, a colored man's widow. She's going to share with us some of the discoveries that she made while working on her book and the connections here in Springfield. Dedria writes about mixed race family issues in Midwest United States. She has been published by the Society for the Study of Midwestern Literature and the Ohio and Michigan Historical Societies. Her work has appeared in the anthologies The Beijing of America, Personal Narratives of Mixed Race Americans, and Black Lives Have Always Mattered. She is a former staff writer with two Gannett Company Inc. daily newspapers, the Commercial News in Danville, Illinois, and the Lansing State Journal in Michigan. She is a former professor of English at the Lansing Community College in Michigan and has taught at Michigan State University. She earned a Master of Arts degree in English from Wayne State University in Detroit and continued professional development at, among others, the Iowa Writers Workshop with James McPherson. Her first book, Mother of Orphans, is about her mixed race family and the issues of working mothers. You can find her at DedraHumphries.com and on Facebook and Twitter. And Twitter at Dedra_HP. So this program tonight, as we have done with other programs, will be recorded. So if there's things that you missed or if you want to share this later with others, you'll have that opportunity. It'll be on our Facebook page and later on our YouTube channel. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing now so Dedria can go ahead and switch to her slides.
Okay. Thank you,
And
Natalie.
she can share her story with us. So I'll remind everybody, if you have questions as we go ahead and you can put them in the chat or you can hold on to them until we get to the end here and we'll have time to address those.
Okay, I'm ready. I'm ready to go. It's so nice to be here with all of you this evening. I appreciate you spending this beautiful Indian summer evening sitting in front of your computer like we didn't already have enough of that. The name of my presentation, well, let me say this. It is a distinct pleasure for me to be presenting to the people in Springfield in Clark County, because I spent a lot of time there at the library and in the archives looking up information, reading the histories, and looking for pictures. And I was rewarded. I just love going to smaller towns because you take such good care of your history. And for people like me who didn't know really anything about my family's history in Springfield, Ohio, it was quite an eye-opener and quite, it filled out a picture and answered a lot of questions for me. My book is Mother of Orphans, the true and curious story of Irish Alice, a colored man's widow. It came out in February of this year. And my presentation tonight is Noblesse, Oblige. Black Lives Matter to John L. Bushnell, the governor's son. What you're going to learn tonight in my presentation, or what I hope to show and that you get, is how I reach the conclusions that I do reach about your people, really, John Bushnell and Robert S. Rogers. I hope that what you'll understand at the end of my presentation is that rich people used to look out for their workers, and I'm not so sure that is true today, but it does seem to be the case in the past. I hope you'll learn that people of different social classes establish relationships of mutual benefit, and I think this is probably the strongest point that I have. And that Black Americans mattered to white Americans of the upper classes in Springfield during the industrial era of the early 20th century. And Springfield was certainly a place where industry was launched in this country. Now, the first thing is, how do I arrive at my conclusions? So it's through deductive reasoning, and that's where you take what you know and try to connect the dots to arrive at some conclusion. So as a historian, I use fact and I use research and I use my logical reasoning to decide what is the truth, or at least what's an accurate truth. You know, it's a way to figure out what happened and why. Of course, I also use my own experience as a comparison to events in the past so that I can understand them, and so people today in the 21st century, the year 2020, so people can understand why it's important. And in my case, I have had some people who were better off than me do things for me, and I was grateful. So this story makes total sense to me. I'm sure that everybody in viewing this evening has had that experience. And then here's an example of the deductive reasoning. So we're going to go to the census of 1910. And in other presentations, I have shown like the original. You can see right here is the information for the my relatives that I follow, John H. Johnson and Alice Johnson. I have taken and made it more plain with type written copy right here so that it's clear to you. So a matter of deductive reasoning. So I could not find, for instance, a marriage license for my great-grandparents. He was, as you can see here, a Black man, and she was a white female. She was Irish. And in my book, Mother of Orphans, I do make quite a big deal of that and what the difference is between white people at the early 20th century and the 19th century and an Irish person. So you get the information about their family. What I want to point to is you see their ages, they're 36 and 35, and this M stands for married. This next number here is 11. So that indicates how long they told the census taker they had been married. And so since this is the census of 1910, then you can see that they trace their marriage, and I can trace their marriage back to 1899, which, you know, doesn't make 11 years in any other era is not very important. But when we're talking about an interracial marriage, 11 years, it puts us back into the late 19th century. So that's a feat of deductive reasoning, taking the information and the fact that I have right here and arriving at a marriage date in the absence of a marriage certificate. I did have, also, you know, deductive reasoning. You can look here, and even though this document does not show, have a direct question of, are these children of the same parent? You can look at the birthplace of the parents and then what the, for the children, what their parents' birth dates were, and you can see that it all matches up. So John Johnson was born in Kentucky, Alice was born in Indiana, their children were born in Ohio, and then this is the mother's birthplace, which matches Alice's, Indiana, and this is the father's birthplace, which matches John's birthplace of Kentucky. And so this is one of the ways that historians can find other information about their subject, even in the absence of direct documents, direct statements. And I use a lot of that because ordinary people, you know, they just don't really have a lot of documents. That's one reason why a lot of history, most history looks at the rich and powerful. Is because we don't have a lot of direct information. The historian Darlene Clark Hine, she's a Black woman. She was interested in Black women history, and in the absence of information, what she did was start asking for church program booklets and family Bibles, And in that way, she was able to deduce the history of her subject. So let's get started with our presentation tonight, now that you understand the process that I use to come to some of my conclusions. Let's look at our setting. So our setting is Springfield, Ohio. This is a map circa 1900. And you know your town. But what I like to say about it is that it's a place that made useful things. It made useful things for agriculture, a lot of factories for agricultural implementation, farming tools and equipment, and for homes. It was the residence of Governor Asa S. Bushnell and his Champion Company, which made a reaper that was quite popular in agricultural industry. And it was also the printing location of New York's Kroll Publishing. So it was a thriving town of about 35,000 at the beginning of the century. Every story has characters. Our characters are John L. Bushnell, John H. Johnson, Alice D. Johnson, his wife, and Robert S. Rogers. These are the main players in my story, my presentation tonight. Let's start with John Bushnell, John L. Bushnell. This is a picture of him from Princeton, which keeps a record on all their students. And he was born in 1872. And he was in the Princeton class of 1894. He was a mathematics major. So this is him about the time, not about the time, at the time he was a student at Princeton. So John Bushnell graduated from Princeton with a degree in mathematics and a love of show horses. This was one of the things that he brought back from the East Coast to Springfield, is his love of show horses. And horses that he owned as a young man, or not as a young man, through his life, were Hackney Morgans, and they were known for their high step and prance. I think these are a couple of them, but I have another picture that I know are definitely his. Let's learn some more about John Bushnell. So he was born in 1872 in Springfield, the only son of Asa and Ellen Ludlow Bushnell. He was the scion of Springfield, Ohio, because his father was the governor and a businessman. Asa Bushnell pretty much masterminded what they used to call combination of businesses. Today we call it a corporation, of small factories that made agricultural equipment like his company, Champion, did. They combined those companies to create International Harvester. He was also the governor of Ohio for two-year terms, 1896 to 1900. John L. Bushnell's wife was Jessie Harwood, and she was a socialite, and they were a socialite couple, right? They had 2 children, 5. Asa S, who was born in 1900, and he had twins, Edward L. and John L. Bushnell, who were born in 1903. Now he had 4 children. And John L. Jr. died in 1905. And then he had a daughter, Suzanne, born in 1907. And this caricature here of him, I think it was taken when he was young. He looks pretty young there. And I think maybe that was one of the first nods to him as the heir to what his father had built in Springfield. Here he's shown as the president of the Springfield, Troy, and Piqua Railroad Company, and also the vice president of the First National Bank. His father died in 1904, and that's when he came into his own. Here's another picture of him. This one here, I think he's around 32 years old. This picture here, he's obviously a more older man, more distinguished looking. He's about 42 years old. This comes from a book called The 63 Years of Banking that was printed in 1914. So that puts him about 42 years old. He's the president of the First National Bank at 42 years old. And that's in contrast to another director, a man named Theodore Trope, who had been a director of the bank since 1897, and he was a vice president. So this one man had 17 years of experience with the bank, and John Bushnell had 10, and he was already the president of the bank. And let me just go back for a moment. Here are other of John Bushnell's executive positions. Many of these companies his family owned, or he owned, because his father started them. He was president starting in 1913 of First National Bank. He also had been vice president of the bank. He also had been a director of the bank. He was president of the Morris Plan Bank, which was founded by his father. He was the owner of Champion Construction. He was the president of the Home Telephone Company. He was the owner of Springfield, Troy, and Pecua Railroad Company and the Springfield and Xenia Traction Company. He was the owner of the Bushnell building downtown. So, I tell you all this to establish that if there was anybody who was nobility in Springfield, it was this man right here, John L. Bushnell. But, all of this, it seemed to me, was really his father's accomplishment. And he just stepped into a role that he had been destined for since he was born. Here's John Bushnell later, and doesn't he look pleased with himself? He's 49 years old. This picture is taken in 1921. And this is a trophy for his show horses. So he used to take his horses from Springfield, ship them back by train to New York, to Sarasota, where he showed them and with his friends. This was something he did with his Princeton East Coast friends, men who were just like him, the rich guy from, many, many towns all over the United States. And this was the way that they had their reunions. He owned horses called, in 1916, he had two horses. One was named the Governor and one was named the Prince. And that kind of tells you everything, right? Okay, so our next character is John Johnson. And here he's shown in a picture that was published in the Springfield Daily News in 1915. In 1915, and he's driving a horse that belonged to John L. Bushnell, and this horse is called Irvington Nellie. This is a Hackney Morgan breed horse, and this horse's name is Irvington Nellie, and John L. H. Johnson's sister's name was Nellie. So what I'm thinking is that this is a horse that John H. Johnson was allowed to name by John L. Bushnell. These Johns sometimes get a little mixed up, but yeah. So that's what I'm thinking, and that's how one of the ways I connect them directly. John Johnson was already connected to horses by my family, but at some point they thought he had been a jockey. I couldn't find him as a jockey. He grew up in around the Lexington area, but he had met his wife, Alice Donlin, in Cincinnati, Ohio, where both of them worked in a great house. Now, he was the horseman and she was a maid. So he was a husband, and what he did was take care of the horses. So now we're talking about in the era before automobiles were widely owned. They were being developed at that time. and he took care of the horse. It was a very important job because without someone to care for the horses and the stable and the carriage and all the accoutrements that went with that, you know, people were not getting around. He was also a father. They lived out their family life in Springfield, Ohio from 1904 to 1913. They arrived in Springfield in 1904, and this boy, his name is Elmer Preston, is their second child. He was born in Springfield. This is Pauline Lucy, their oldest child. She was born in 1902 in Cincinnati, and this little girl became my grandmother. They also had a child, Levi or Levy, and he was born in 1906, but he died in 1909 from the croup, which was a complication of the whooping cough. And then they had a fourth child, their last child, Elizabeth, who was born in 1910. Now, I'm looking at my notes here, and I want to go back and talk just a minute about these horses, and because there are a couple of things. So notice the legs on this horse, these two horses. Notice how they're straight. Now look at this horse right here, displaying exactly what this horse was prized for, which was their high step and prance, and that was the thing that they were judged for. I draw that to your attention because later on, when I tell you the date that John Johnson died, you're going to say, how could that be? How could this be him when this picture was taken in 1915? John Johnson died in 1912. But photography was such that it was in its early development, and you had to hold still a long time, even to get a picture of somebody who was just sitting there. So most pictures were like that early picture, just standing there. Can you imagine what it took to get this horse to sit there, or to stand there with his leg in the air long enough to get this picture? So my point is that I can make the deduction that this is John Johnson from the name of the horse. And also, even though the only picture that I have is from 3 years after his death, is that because they would use pictures over and over again because they didn't have any other ones. It was difficult enough to get this picture, so they would just keep using the picture as long as it was applicable to the situation. And in this case right here, they were publicizing a horse show in Dayton, Ohio, that John Bushnell was taking this horse to. All right, so we met Alice Donlin, we met their children, and oh, I meant to change these. I'll change them right now. Okay. Now, unfortunately, John Johnson died on May 29th, 1912, and this is his death certificate. He died, you can see right here, he died from cardiac disease, which was also called exhaustion. And he was attended at home for 2 days from May 27th to May 29, 1912, by a Dr. Charles B. Hammer, who kept his office in the King building, okay, the King building. Dr. Hammer signed his death certificate on May the 30th. This is the King building right here. It's a glitzy, Gilded Age building with arched windows throughout. That's not easy. Well, in the middle, right here, these are more square. That's not an easy architectural feature to have. So this was a building that was put up with some fanfare, as well as, you know, several other buildings in Springfield. They all seem like big buildings to me because, like the arcade, I learned about the arcade. It was the fanciest hotel in Springfield, and all the traffic that came through from the railroad. So this is an impressive building. So my question is, And John Johnson, he was a horse guy. Yeah, he was working for John L. Bushnell, but he wasn't working in the lucrative parts of the Bushnell empire. He was working for him personally, basically what was John Bushnell's hobby, right? His show horses. It was important to him, but you know, it wasn't something you were going to get rich on. John Johnson had several other things that he did, and we'll get to that in a moment. So how did John Johnson get into Dr. Hammer's practice? How did he get to be a patient of his? John Bushnell. You know, just like we refer our friends to our doctors, I think John Bushnell asked Dr. Hammer to go by there, go by the house on Harrison Street and see how his horseman was doing. Now, here's the Bushnell-Johnson connection. So you had John Bushnell. So why was John Bushnell attracted to John Johnson? Well, they had a lot of things in common, at least three things. John Bushnell's namesake son, John L. Bushnell Jr., died in 1905 at nearly age 2 years. John Johnson's second son, Levy Johnson, died in 1909 at age 3 years. So there's this common bond of having lost a son. And I'm sure that John Bushnell showed some compassion to his horseman who went through the same thing that he did. John Bushnell owned Hackney Morgan show horses. John Johnson was a Kentucky native born around Lexington, and he was a horse lover. He was a horse groomer. He was a horse trainer. He was a horse gambler. And he was a bartender. He was a bartender down in the district that was known as the Jungles. He was, that's where they did the drinking and the smoking and the fornication, that sort of thing. I'm not quite sure if it was called the Jungle because Black people frequented, although it would have been, you know, a lower rent district, or if it was because that many of the drinking establishments were owned by Black men. So that, I'm not quite sure what that was, but that's what that district was called. And then John Bushnell, he owned several businesses, which included a construction company. And John Johnson was the son of Isaac Johnson, who was a mason by trade, who went to Kentucky during the Reconstruction period to help put back together that state after John Hunt Morgan, the Confederate general, had ridden through Kentucky several times trying to gain entrance into Ohio across the river, and met resistance every single step of the way, and burned down and wrecked many towns in Kentucky, including Cynthiana. I mean, I can pretty much tell you which towns those were, because those were the towns that John Johnson's father went to work. Cynthiana, Winchester, well, those two. They were around Lexington. So John Johnson and John Bushnell, they had many similarities, many commonalities, common interests, especially around these horses. So I would think that John Bushnell would look out for this man. So here we are, we got John Johnson's widow, his children, and his sisters, his survivors. And this is on the day of John Johnson's funeral in Springfield, Ohio on June 1st, 1912, which unfortunately was the date of his son's birthday, his son's 8th birthday. This is Elmer Preston called Bud. So now let's just pause here for a moment because I have to set the scene. Most of this is the theme of my book, Mother of Orphans, which is about this girl, Polly, and her mother. So Alice Johnson is an Irish American woman, and now she's like age 30, 8 or something, when her husband dies in 1912, and she's left with these three young children. Polly was age 10, Bud was turning 8, and this is Elizabeth. She's not quite 3 years old. And what I discovered about her family, and discovered about the Irish in particular, is that they set high store on education. And so now, here Alice, her house at 606 Harrison Street, her house is paid for. Her husband and her father-in-law built this house for her. It's paid for, but the kids still have to eat. They got to have shoes and clothes. And so she has to go back to work. She's a maid, and she has to go back to work. So she needs some help with the care for her baby. And this was before the time of Social Security. Now kids whose one parent has died, they're eligible for Social Security, or they're eligible for aid to dependent children. Or you can get one of your relatives to help you with child care. These women, her sister-in-laws, all of them were basically in her same position. They needed to work as well. Only two of them lived in Springfield. The rest lived out of town. After Springfield, the closest ones lived in Detroit, these two, Charity and Lucy. But Pauline and Nellie, they lived in Springfield. So, it would seem like that would be the most logical thing. What people do today is they help. But one of the things that people did at the early part of the 20th century is that grown women, if they needed to work, they did not take care of children, because who was going to pay them? Alice wasn't making enough money to pay for a grown woman who needed money to support her household. She wasn't going to make enough money to make it worth their while. So what people used to do was the oldest girl would come out of school and come home to watch the babies. The boys didn't do that, but the girls did. And at age 10, Polly was considered to be old enough to stop going to school. She was in fifth grade. She was considered to be old enough to come home and watch her little sister. And these, the Black family, and this happened with Black families and white families, and European families in particular. Jacob Rise, the sociologist who wrote the book, How the Other Half Lives, he documented this in photographs, and I have a picture, one of his pictures in my book. He documented this concept of the little mama. And that's what the oldest daughter was doing. She wouldn't be more than, 10, 12, 13 years old, because then after that, you could go get a real job. But the same thing happened in the Johnson family. Pauline, she stopped going to school at age 12 to take care of her sister's baby. Her sister died shortly after childbirth, and there were two older children who the father's mother took, but she couldn't take care of a baby. An infant is 24/7 care. You just can't leave them alone. So Pauline was Pauline right here. She was put in charge of a baby at age 12. So, once something in your family happens and it turns out okay, then, you figure like we can do that again if we need to. And that's what the Black side of the family was suggesting, that this young girl come home from school and watch her little sister. But the Irish, and in particular Alice's family, I found her aunt, her father's sister, they told the census she was in school at age 17. So, you know, education was important to that family. Alice's father, he was in school at age 15. So that was not a family that took kids out of school to work or you know, whatever it is that seemed like was more important. So Alice was faced with a dilemma, even though she had was estranged from her family. Basically, they abandoned her for marrying this black guy, and so she couldn't get any help from them. But that didn't mean that she had abandoned her values. Our values are deeply ingrained. We hardly question them. And so to her mind, at least the way that I deduced this story, her mind was that her children had to go to school. So what was she going to do? What was she going to do? She had a child care problem. Now in Springfield, there was the Clark County Children's Home. There also were two other homes for children. One was the Osterland home, which was Lutheran, and the other one was the Pythian home, which was a private membership, Knights of Pythias. And they did not accept colored children. So that was not an option for her. They were basically membership organizations. The Clark County Children's Home comes through a long history of that starts really with the Civil War and Abraham Lincoln. I'm not going to go into that, but the Clark County Children's Home was the only one to accept colored children. And in 1913, when she put her children in the home, there were 32 white children and 14 colored. So it was integrated, but it wasn't overrunning with colored people. So, you know, there was probably, you know, some kind of quota system of what was felt to be acceptable, which, you know, we've seen that with a lot of social institutions in the United States. It's that, you know, you can have so many blacks, but at a certain number, it's not gonna work. So who do you think helped her to get her children? And 3 children. Now look, they only had here it shows 46 kids in the home. I think there were about 45. Got one down here. In 1912, there were 39. They called them inmates. In 1913, the year Alice put her children in the home, there were 45. So that number pretty much works. Now, so who do you think helped her with that? John Bushnell spoke up for her so that she could get her 3 children in the home and not have to take her oldest girl, Polly, out of school to watch her baby. And it wasn't an orphanage. Like when I was growing up, they always called it, you know, an orphanage. Your grandma was in an orphanage when she was a kid. It wasn't like that. Alice was able to go back and forth to the home and see her children. She was able to take them out for lunch. They went on vacation. And at times when the county didn't have enough money and their budget was running low, they asked parents to pay. So in some ways it was sort of like a boarding home, but the problem was getting in the first place. So that's why I think John Bushnell, who by this time in 1913 was the president of First National Bank, I mean, but he, you know, he was just a powerful person. And if he wanted it to happen, it was going to happen. So I think that he was responsible for getting her children into this home, which kind of smoothed out all her problems in terms of not worrying about her children, where they're going to be latchkey kids, what was going to happen when she was sleeping and they were awake, or, you know, and I have a fictionalized version of this story that I hope to publish in the next year or so. And I'm able to really use my deductive reasoning to fill out the story with scenes and all of that. So here now she's able to get her children into the Clark County Children's Home. Now the Polly, that's where our focus is. Polly is a real pretty good student, and so she goes to 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade at the home. And 8th grade was spent in what's called the country school. Miss Davis ran the school, and Polly was such a good student. It was really more than her mother could have hoped for. But Polly was such a good student that she was admitted to Springfield High School, the first one that looks just like the Library of Congress. That's how rich your town was, that they could pay for the new high school out of pocket change, while the Library of Congress was, you know, trying to just pull together any money it could to pay for its Library of Congress. Anyway, Polly was admitted to the high school without taking the entrance exam, which was called the Boxwell-Patterson test, because the curriculum was statewide, and her test scores were so good that, you know, they just admitted her. The state said she can go to high school. She doesn't have to take this test. So she finished her first year in high school, and then now this one, we can see that the home is getting some pressure, right? With all the students that are, not students, all the children that are being admitted to the home. And one of the reasons was because of not the Civil War, but industrial accidents, which put families in a bad spot, either through injury or death, where they didn't have a father. They called these children half orphans. So here, let's look at how the population at Clark County Children's Home increased. In 1912, there were 39 inmates. That's what they called them. In 13, there were 45 when Alice put her children in the home. In 1914, in January, there were 57. In September, when school was starting, 62 kids in the home. And they called it in their annual report a full house. By November, there were 76 children in residence at the Clark County Children's Home. They needed Polly's bed. She was 14, she was in high school, she was the first home inmate to go to high school. It was considered a luxury. So what were they going to do? Well, what happened, because now Alice was feeling encouraged that her daughter could graduate high school, what happened was this man, Robert S. Rogers, he and his wife, Edith, offered Polly a place in their home. I'm sure you all know this house, still standing, this funeral home now. They actually let me go through it when I came to Springfield. It's a beautiful place. But he was old money. His people had come to Springfield really pretty much close to the beginning, like 1823, a physician. And you could tell, look, he's Princeton class of 1896. He was superintendent of the American Seeding Company, which made drills, seeders, sowers, cane mills, which I'm not quite sure what that is, sawmills, corn and potato planters, all of these implements that you needed for agriculture. He was also a director of the First National Bank, where John Bushnell was also director, vice president. This picture here, he was Robert Rogers. He was 34 years old when he was appointed a director. He had been a director since May of 1908. In this photograph, he's 40 years old, because this picture was taken in 1914. He was also a director at American Trust and Savings Bank. He had been the president of the Springfield Dairy Products. He had been president of the George H. Mellon Company. He had been president of Patrick Furnace Company. He was an executive. in Springfield. So these were well-off people. Lived in this beautiful house. This was a farmhouse that they had remodeled into a mansion, and that's where they lived. 830 North Limestone Avenue, Springfield, home of Robert and Edith Rogers, where Polly Johnson was a servant. Except was she really a servant? She was a high school student. And they had two other servants according to the census in 1920. They had Mr. Jackson, who was their chauffeur, and they had Mae Johnson, who was the cook housekeeper. And now they have Polly Johnson, no relationship to Mae Johnson. But what they really wanted her for was, remember how Polly got into high school? She passes Boxwell. Oh, okay. I'm so sorry. Let me see if I can get rid of this. Okay, this is who they were really interested in. Oh, come on.
If you go back over to the other screen, I think you can get it to do full screen on the other. There you go.
Okay, I'm good. Okay, down here in my corner, this is Alice Rogers, and Natalie said that she's well known because she was on radio in Springfield. This was the Rogers' daughter. They had two daughters, Alice and Lucinda. And this is a picture from my grandmother's scrapbook, Polly's scrapbook. The upper right picture was taken when she was a resident inmate of the Clark County Children's Home about 1915. The lower right picture is Alice Rogers at age 13. She was 2 years younger than Polly. Well, everybody knows that she became the mother of the comedian Jonathan Winters, and she was quite funny herself. And that's what worried her parents. Was she going to be able to pass the Boxwell-Patterson entrance exam for high school? They weren't so sure. But when they learned about Polly, who had gotten into high school without the exam, they wanted her for their daughter. And my grandma said that mostly what she did was help Alice Rogers do her homework. Make sure she did her homework so that she could pass this test and go on. Now, how did they know about Polly? How did the Rogers know about Polly? Well, I think it was the Old Boys Network, right? Look, both of these men, John Bushnell and Robert S. Rogers, both of them went to Princeton, right? Rogers was 2 years behind John Bushnell. Both of them sat on the National Bank Board of Directors. John Bushnell apparently inherited his father's seat. He went on to the board in January of 1904, and Robert Rogers went on in May of 1908. And that's just two of the things. They probably belonged in the same country club. They didn't go to the same church. John Bushnell was Episcopalian, and the Rogers were Presbyterian. So, but what did they have? Rogers was old money. Bushnell was new money. His father came from New York, Rome, New York, and pretty much made his fortune did make his fortune in Springfield. So I think that John Bushnell, knowing that the Rogers were concerned about their daughter, said, hey, I know somebody who could help you, and they need this and you need that. And so one hand washes the other, and Polly ended up living in their house for 3 years, and she graduated from high school in 1920. She was one of 7 colored students who were graduating seniors in the class that had nearly 200 students in it. And this was quite a big deal in Springfield, as it was any place in the country, but especially in Springfield. The newspaper covered everything the graduating class did. You could see the senior woman's dinner. You could see a picture of all the homerooms of all the graduating students. So it was a mutual benefit Now, did Alice, did she, um, go into high school? She did. And she ended up getting married. I really like this picture. She looks quite pretty in that, her wedding picture. And then she became the mother of the comedian Jonathan Winters. So I think I'm running a little over time, but let's just go back up here. And I think that I have shown that, I mean, the Black Lives Matter part is that these were colored people that Bushnell took an interest in, and because he could gain something. So there was this mutual benefit, but for him and for the Rogers family, but the fact is that they didn't abandon them. And Alice Johnson, she needed this help, and she was able to get it. So that's my presentation on John Bushnell as a man to whom Black lives matter, and those Black lives were in my family. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it, and I'm open to questions now if people have any.
Yeah, I have a question. This is Dick Graber.
Okay.
You said that Alice Johnson was the mother of Jonathan Winters. Now, how did Johnny get the name of Winters?
No. Alice Rogers was, not Alice Johnson.
Oh, okay. So how did Winters get his name of Winters out of Johnson?
So
no, out of Rogers. Alice Rogers married a banker whose name was Jonathan Winters. He was from Dayton.
So Alice Rogers was, so she was originally a Rogers, then she married Winters.
Oh,
I believe they divorced, and then she later married a Bauman. So
right,
she was known as Alice Bauman, I believe, on the radio here in town. Is that true?
yeah, she was with WICE,
Yeah.
and I used to do weather reports on the WBLY, and I remember talking about us back and forth, how popular we both were. So that's how I knew about Alice, what her name was.
Yeah, it gets a little tricky because, unlike today where people have a lot of unique names, in the past, there were a lot of Alice's. In my family, there were a lot of Paulines, So I can understand how you thought I said one thing because I'm talking about two different Alice's, but it was Alice Rogers who became Jonathan Winters' mother.
Dedria, I had a question for you that some people had online when they saw about the program, and a question I have as well about the children's home records, how you were able to access those, because I know that you got some of them from us here at the records we have at the Heritage Center. We have some on microfilm, but they pretty much only go through the time period you were looking for. Like this is the microfilm here. They ended in 1917. But
Right.
the records I saw included in the pictures in your book don't look like our records. So my
No,
question is, where did you get your records?
I went right to the county.
Okay, so how
County.
if someone wanted to get to those records, how would they go about getting them?
You call the county. I mean, I can look in my file and see who the name of the person was. But I called them and told them what I was looking for, and they told me where to come. And I sat down at a microfilm machine at the county office, the health and welfare office.
The health department, or okay.
Not the health department, but like the welfare division. And I was able to look at those records and then print them. And then even years later, because I've been at this for a while, and I asked them, my copies are, I'm wondering if over this time, if you have gotten a better microfilm printer. And they had, and then they sent them to me again. They told me that initially my grandmother signed off on me seeing her records. But the second time I went back, my grandmother had already passed. And they said, because you're a direct relative, you don't need a lawyer or any of that to get this information.
Okay, so that may be something that might be a barrier for some people trying to get records if they're not a direct descendant or anything. Because yeah, that was a common question. I know that's a question that we get here at the Heritage Center when people need to get records beyond the years we can help them with. I
Yeah,
know that it's not necessarily the easiest thing to get a hold of those kinds of records.
right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. If
but
it looks,
it was
if it
really
looks,
interesting where you showed how they came in and out of the home. Like the youngest child, she came out for a couple of months and lived with her mother again, and then went back. I think that's an interesting part of the story too, to see, and then how Polly managed to get out through going to school and living with the Rogers family. So that was
exactly.
all
Yeah.
very interesting.
You know, there was in 1909 there was a White House conference on dependent children, children just like my grandma's, my grandma and her sister and brother, who were dependent on their mothers, who at that time, you know, most women, one, didn't work if you were fortunate enough to be married and your husband was still alive. But other women, they had like, you know, just really low wage jobs, maid and cook, laundress, that sort of thing. And they just didn't have enough money. So in 1909, they got together at the White House and discussed this. And that's where we got our foster care system from. Because before that, it was, you know, institutional care like the Clark County Children's Home. I'm not so convinced if that was a improvement on especially the children's home concept, because it allowed the mother to keep her relationship going with her children, and she could see them, and they could be a family. But when she went to work, she didn't have to worry about were they going to bed, were they up all night, you know, in our day, watching television, were they eating well. She knew her children were being cared for. So in foster care, there's been a lot of, at that time, the opposition was that people who took in foster kids really were looking for cheap labor, especially in the case of girls, that they wanted a cheap babysitter. So there was quite a bit of contention, but what came out of that was the foster care system that we live with today.
Another interesting thing I think that comes out of understanding the system with the different homes that were here was that I know when a lot of people, when you think of orphanages, you think that they're orphans, they're full orphans, but you pointed out, you know, that being a half orphan was actually much more common. And you see that across the different homes, the Masonic home and the Pythian and the IOOF, that they were not necessarily without parents. They just were, their parents were at a point where they, you know, they could not care for them. And this was another opportunity for them to be cared for.
Exactly.
So, because I know,
I got that from, that's the term that that Abraham Lincoln alluded to in his second inaugural address when he referred to the slain Civil War soldier as his orphan. And Abraham Lincoln got that from the Bible, where they do talk about that. So it's all about, you know, men and the father and his status.
does anybody out there have any specific questions? I know before I wanted to say a little bit more about your book, Dedria. It's really fantastic. Is it available on Amazon?
It is
If
available
people,
on Amazon.
so I really like the structure of your book was really interesting. The way you looked at the different generations of women, how they were affected by initially the choices of the matriarch of your family, who was a white woman, and how her decisions in her life affected the further generations, like the fact that she chose to put her children in the home did give them a better opportunity for education that carried on through the later generations of your family, that allowed for better educational opportunities that might not have been if they had, like if Pauline had been taken out of the home, if Pauline had just watched her brothers and sisters and raised them, you know, instead of getting an education. So
Yeah, it's made all the difference for me. I have 2 degrees in English, and I've worked as a journalist, an editor, and a publisher, and taught college for 18 years, teaching, writing, and I'm one of 13, and all my sisters and brothers went to college, and 11 of us graduated, and then there's 6 professional degrees in there. One of my sisters is a judge, 2 of my brothers are attorneys, we have psychologists. I mean, it just made a whole lot of sense to look at this issue of education and where did our family get this strong educational value from. So it made a whole lot of sense to me when I started looking at it.
Does anybody have any questions?
Natalie, I do. I got the book also, and I'm not all the way through it. But I guess my question, was there ever any reconciliation with Alice's side of the family, or have I just not read all far enough into it to know that everybody finally met and got to know each other?
No, we haven't gotten to the Jefferson Hemming stage yet. I did go to Lawrenceburg, and the Irish people, so the Germans lived in Lawrenceburg, which is on the Ohio River, right? And the Irish people lived up in the hills above Lawrenceburg, I'm in Michigan. So when we drive south, Indiana looks like super flat, right? There's no earth features at all. But if you're coming from the south, like from Kentucky, it's rolling, and Indiana actually has hills as you come up. At any rate, I went to St. John's Catholic Church, which was the Donlan family church. And I went to the cemetery, and I found a lot of Donlans in the cemetery. And the clerk at the Catholic Church at St. John's told me there was 1 or 2 Donlans, not by that name, women. We lose our names when we get married, but still in the area. And she gave me her name and she gave me her number, but I didn't contact her because I didn't really, that wasn't what I was trying to do. I was trying to tell Alice's story. I wasn't trying to find people. I might yet do that to see if, if she knew of her or what. But to my mind, I was perfectly satisfied with what the records told me and what my family had said about her, because she actually ended her life with us, and I feel like she's ours and not theirs.
Well, it seemed like from what you talked about in the book that her family of origin no longer acknowledged her once she had left them and married a black man and had this family. So but yeah, it was another thing so Patty, since you've been reading it too, your writing style of how you brought those records to life was just
Right.
fascinating. I mean, you didn't just say, they appeared in the 1910 census here. You set it up as a story. You knew the date that the census taker was there because that's on the record. So you told it as a story. This
Right.
census taker came to their house on this date and talked to them. And, she recorded the family as a black woman, a white woman, and 2 mulatto children. So you're showing that you're breathing more life into the story. That's just, the words on the page. And I thought that was really, really interesting. It makes for, you can put yourself in the place of the people much, much more when you put it that way. I mean, and me as someone who helps people do genealogy, I think that's a fascinating way to look at a record, to say, not just, put it in a binder and say, okay, here's all of our census records, to put it as a story. And I think that you do that very, very well with those records. So
Thank you very much. I enjoyed stories, so I felt like it was an obligation for me to try to give back to people, my reader, what I had enjoyed other writers doing. So thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I had a question about some of the pictures that you had in there from the James Andrew and Mary Jane Humphries, your parents.
Yes.
So they have a foundation?
Yes. I'm the
and that's
president.
and that's where the family photos are then.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't realize until I glanced at the pictures when I first got the book, and then as I was reading, I realized, oh, those are her parents. Those are your parents, and that's their. So that's wonderful to have the family photos recorded somewhere like that.
Isn't it? I think it makes it really nice to have them bound in a way. You know, I tell a little story in the book about every time I went to my grandma's house, I'm supposed to be helping her clean her house, and I'm dusting the baseboards. If anybody knows about that kind of cleaning. And when I would get over by where she kept her albums, I would just sit down on a footstool, take out the album, dust it a little, and then open it and look at all these pictures of people. And then suddenly she's like, Dedria, you know, get back to work. But so, you know, I think it is good to have them bound in that way for my family, that they can go and look at these pictures and have them. So, because we're like, you know, wide flung now, and it's just a really efficient way to handle it. So.
I would like to make a comment. I was watching online an old I've Got a Secret show, and they had Jonathan Winters on there and his mother, Alice Ballman. And it showed this. This was back in the 1950s. And this was about the only time that I can remember that they had both of them on television at the same time.
Huh. Huh.
That's really neat.
I never, until I looked at the story, my grandma used to talk about Ms. Rogers, and she used to talk about Jonathan Winters a lot when I was a kid, and I just didn't understand, you know, why. But now I understand, you know, why he meant so much to her, why she followed his career, because she knew his family. I mean, she was a part of their family for 3 years, so.
I think that raises another really interesting point about the stories that get passed down to your family. Like when you're a kid, you don't really quite understand all of the stories. And I remember in the book you talk about that it almost in passing after Alice had died when you were a child, that your mother kind of mentioned, just kind of as a throwaway, did you know that they were in a children's home? And that kind of what sparked your interest about, you know, someday you wanted to learn more about that, but it wasn't really quite something that you understood as a kid, because in your mind you're imagining Little Orphan Annie and, you know, that kind of, you know, and that's how you imagine their experience to be. So and I remember when you first came here to do research at the library, the story that had been passed down to you was that John Henry Johnson had worked for the governor.
Mm-hmm.
And when you did more research, you realized that was not possible, because by the time they had come to town, the governor had already died.
Yeah.
And that's when you put the pieces together and realized that, yes, he worked for the governor's son. So that shows, you know, the kind of so there's the partial story that gets passed down through the family, but it may not quite be right, may not quite match up with the information that you end up finding. So that's where you use a lot of your deductive reasoning too, to put the things together.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that people didn't know what that my grandma didn't know what she was talking about, even though, even though she had part of it wrong, she had part of it right. That's the part I looked at, is that I took the view that she had part of it right. And about the horses, and then without even knowing where he was from, then when I realized that he had grown up around Lexington, I was like, this makes perfect sense, you know. We don't always get the details, and then if you're in a family like mine where people really don't talk a lot and you don't question people, like now kids question you, you know, they're more critical thinkers, but then, you know, you just accepted what your elders said, and you didn't question them. That you didn't do that. That wasn't a thing that you did. So, but after a while, when you're older, you realize, you know, this doesn't quite fit. You know, how can I fix it? And the way you can fix it is reading the local history. You know, to start making timelines of where your people were, where other people were, what people were doing. and then the story could start to come together. And believe me, it's I make a joke of this, but I'm quite serious. If you're doing research on your family genealogy, your relatives, your most interested audience, they are going to be more interested if you tell them a story as opposed to just giving them a list of names and dates. If it's Thanksgiving and you got on the captive audience and you start doing the names and dates, pretty soon everybody's going to drift back to the television and the football game. So.
I think that's a good lesson for everybody, though, that we should now record what we know, because we know that it doesn't always get passed down exactly correctly. So it's a good rule for people to be your family historian, to get it down while you can and talk to those people while you can. I know Patty is a volunteer of ours, and she's been bringing in her family collections and history, and she's helping process them herself so that she knows that she's got the information that goes with the family. And I think that's really important, that if you've got people that know around still, ask them, because you won't always have that opportunity. So
congratulations, Patty. That's good.
Thank you. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah.
So, well, I really appreciate you sharing your story with us, and I hope that other people are able to get their hands on your book. I know we'll have a copy up in the library and archives for people to look at, and it's fascinating. I know of the volunteers I had up today were all going through it and wanting to read it over the next few weeks while they're in here volunteering and get their hands on their own copies. So it's a fascinating way to look at family history, and I was very invested in finding out how everybody's stories would go. So it was very interesting. So thank you for talking to us about the local connections.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Like I said, I spent a fair amount of time in Springfield, and I'm not a small town girl. I grew up in Detroit, and I enjoy big cities, but Springfield has so much to recommend it. It's just like that big, is it the farmers market now, that building? Oh man.
Yeah, well, the farmers market is next to our building, actually.
Yeah.
The last week is this coming weekend, I think, for the season.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful building. I just really like architecture, and you just have so many examples of beautiful architecture. So it's a pretty place to look at, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and we're our museum. We're happy that we're finally back open. Our museum, as of last week, was officially back open to the public. So we're happy to have people back here, and our building's 130 years old. So I'm certain your Johnson family and would have come here maybe to go to the market or go through. So that's a interesting thing to think about.
Yeah.
So if anybody doesn't have any other questions, if you
Natalie, I have one.
Go ahead.
Is this Rogers family the same one that ended up with Richard Rogers marrying into wearing the Westcott?
I believe Richard Rogers is in that line, Dedria. I think you mentioned that was.
They go way back to like 1833. And then it was Robert Rogers, and they're physicians and business people, but mostly they're physicians. Robert S. Rogers, the one I'm concerned with, he was an industrialist, but his brother was a doctor, and so was their grandfather. But their father, who was Richard Rogers, he was an industrialist. So it seems like it was skipping generations, first a doctor, then an industrialist. And then the third generation, there were like four or five kids surviving. Although Robert S. Rogers, he apparently was the only surviving child of his parents. So I'm not sure about the Westbrook connection. You have to understand, I tend to have tunnel vision when I'm doing research. Research is so much fun, and I go off on tangents, but I try to be more disciplined than that, So it could be, I don't know. That's probably something Natalie could help.
Yeah, I'm sure I can figure that out. but yeah, it's so easy to go off on tangents when you're doing research. That's the fun part, but it's also dangerous if you're
Yeah.
trying to, if you have an end
Exactly.
goal. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
I have a comment for you. I've been a weather reporter for the National Weather Service for a long time. And you said something at the top that this was a nice Indian summer day. This technically is not Indian summer. Indian summer doesn't come in until the first part of October, until after we have our first killing frost. And we didn't
but
have
that was last Sunday.
we didn't have a killing frost.
oh no, I say
it's
it's,
middle and upper 30s, but it was not a killing frost. And
But
so
I got that one.
technically, and we got a warming trend here. And so technically, the weather service doesn't consider it Indian summer until actually about the first or second week in October after that frost.
Well, I hope it keeps going because it's beautiful.
it is. It is. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. If you think of any other questions, you can email us. You can email Dedria, or I'm sure she'll be happy to answer. And
I will.
we're happy to have you here with us tonight. So,
Well, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. This is the first time I've tried this story, and I really like this story. The story of Noblesse, Oblige, and I think we could use more of that. So,
yeah.
Thank you, Natalie, for inviting me, and thank you everybody for coming out tonight or coming to your computer.
Yes. Good to see you all. So, thank you guys.
See you
Have a
all
great
Friday.
night. Bye.